What's up, guys? We are back. We're here. We're doing Snake Mountain finally. So I've done the unboxing, the assembly of Snake Mountain, but today we're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about everything that's here on this table, everything that it comes with, how big it is, what it does, any kind of weird quirks that it may or may not have, and just talk about what is ultimately the most ambitious project that Super7 has undertaken by far, obviously. I mean, this thing is massive, it's enormous, it is a huge piece of Motu Classics history, because as we know, at this point, for all intents and purposes, Motu Classics is done unless somebody has plans we don't know about. But for now, I'm assuming that the line is over, and honestly, there is not much of a better way to go out than by making the playset that we've wanted for years and that we really thought was never going to happen. So, yeah, here it is. So before we talk about this, we do have to talk about the box because, well, it's enormous on its own. It's massive. It is a humongous piece of cardboard that is going to need to be stored because it's beautiful and it's covered in that amazing Jason Edmiston art. So he does, or did, the artwork for the reaction figures, and they had him do this massive painting for the box art. So you've got Snake Mountain in all of its glory with a bunch of Motu characters all over it. It's just fantastic. It's very vintage looking, inspired because it's an actual painting, so it has that vintage look and feel. You've got a panel that has the bio, so we've got a bio for Snake Mountain, which very much looks like everything we've come to expect from Motu Classics. So there is a full bio on one of the side panels of the box for Snake Mountain. The other side panel has a bunch of vignettes that shows you what the Snake Mountain playset comes with, what you can do with it, where you can put figures, how you can play with it, the whole 9 yards. And then the back, taking a cue from the vintage playsets, gives you that kind of outline look and feel for the playset and all the stuff that it comes with, just kind of show you what's in the box. So the box is massive. It's so big that the Grayskull box, the Castle Grayskull box, can fit inside of it, to give you an idea of just how large it is. But it's a fantastic looking piece, definitely something that, even despite its size, I can't get rid of. So let's do it. Let's take a look at this thing. We're going to start with the front, obviously, because that's where it all begins, and we're going to see what this thing has going on. So we're just going to jump right into it, and we're going to take a look at it from the front, like I said. So you've got what is ultimately, probably the largest thing that might exist in your collection, depending on what you have. So this thing ended up being, based on my measurements anyway, ended up being 38 inches up to the very top. We'll take a look at the spire here in a minute. This thing is so big, it's really hard for me to actually capture it on film. And then about 42 inches across, so wide. And that is a bit different than what we originally thought. So originally everything was advertised as 36 high by 48 long, and I'm assuming that there were some changes down the road that precipitated it needing to be smaller, possibly for shipping or for cost reasons or whatever. I don't really feel like I'm missing anything by not having those 6 inches, but at the same time I wouldn't know without having it next to each other. So I still think this thing is absolutely massive. I mean, no matter how you slice it, it's a humongous piece, and it is obviously very much referencing the, well, at least by the face here, we're referencing a lot of the vintage playset. And I've said this a number of times, when it comes to Motu stuff, I didn't have a lot as a kid. I was old enough to have Motu right as it was dying, so it really wasn't much of a thing for me. I've never owned a Snake Mountain, and I'm not sure I will ever own a vintage Snake Mountain because I have this, and I don't really feel much of a pull towards that. This thing, though, very much is a vintage-inspired Snake Mountain with some notable changes. Of course, we have what is ultimately, your normal purple shell, so it's done up in purple plastic with all of these extra details added on. So you've got things like all of the vines, kind of like the veiny look that's going on here, all of these raised vines that are painted individually. You've got like the airbrushed look that comes up through the walkway, across the bridge, and then up the spiral staircase. And then all of just these little fine details, little things that you might not notice until you get, your head crammed right into it. So you've got things like the monster face here, or the monster face here. You've got your real metal chains for the shackles, so you've got those there, and of course these have like a rusty patina to them, so you can attach one of your heroic masters onto it. So we can discuss that here in a bit, and we see exactly how figures can fit on this thing. You've of course got what is, I mean, obviously the biggest focal point in many respects to this thing is the face. So the face of Snake Mountain, which is of course a huge nod to the vintage playset. This guy has a moving mouth, so it doesn't talk or anything. You know, there's no speaker, there's no Bluetooth, there's no microphone or anything like what Mattel was originally planning to do. But this guy does have kind of the moving mouth to give you something as far as play value goes when it comes to, you know, make him talk or something. It does of course have the wolf spire up there though, to give you an idea of what it would look like if the microphone did in fact exist and do anything. I don't really think I'm missing anything in that regard. I don't feel like I'm missing out. I think I might use it one time and probably never do it again. So it's not a big deal to me. Personally speaking, I don't know that it would get much play value. My biggest draw, though, is truly just the size and how large this thing is as far as scale goes. It is a massive piece. It's really hard to put into words exactly how big this is until you see it, until you get it built and in front of you. And of course, you do have to put this thing together. I did do the unboxing assembly video to kind of showcase it. It's not that difficult, and it amounts to a very, very cool looking playset. So you've got all of those details over here with this massive face, and then of course you've got the lava falls, which are very much a Filmation thing. So this is kind of how they bridge the gap a little bit. So to pull in a few Filmation ideas, you've got the bridge here literally, and this is actually a separate piece that pops out. So you have to put this together, and this is what keeps it locked really. So this is the hinge right here, this seam right here, and then you pop this guy in and it won't fold in on itself anymore. So it can't collapse when that's there. So it kind of locks it out. You've got that, and then you've got your lava falls there, your blood falls, whatever you want to call it. So very much like something that you would see in the cartoon because it's pouring out of the snake mouth. It's just sort of a way to bring like one of those little nods in there. This is a translucent piece, so you could shine a light through this if you wanted to have it look a little more illuminated, a little bit more lively. And of course, it's all surrounded by more of the plastic shell. So you've got all of the spires that are coming out of it, the spikes, all of this, tons of that black and brown airbrushing all throughout. And then you've got your snake that's coiling around. So this is something that's kind of a vintage nod, but it's also sort of a Filmation nod because of how the snake spirals around the spire. Because Snake Mountain in the cartoon was really literally just a mountain. It was just a spire with a snake that kind of wrapped around it. So this is very much that. And it culminates with the huge staircase, which is also another vintage inspired thing. You've got this ledge over here for some sort of a play area for some figures. We've got this big hole back here that actually leads back in to Snake Mountain, so you can have your characters kind of creep their way through this side, and then you've got spikes and spires that run all the way through with more of that dry brushing, more of that air brushing to bring out all of the sculpt. Because that's one thing that really can't be understated here, is that there's so much detail crammed into this. There is every little nook and cranny has some sort of texture, something to bring out those paint details to make everything just pop a little bit more. So while it may not seem like it's tremendously painted at first glance, the more you look, the more you see all these little hits here and there, all like the frosted spikes and everything, all of the black that brings out the walkway that fades into gray with more of these vines that are all over it. And it's just a tremendously well done looking piece. I think it looks fantastic. I mean, when you get this out of the box and you assemble it, the first thing that you're going to think is just, holy crap, look how big this is. But then you're going to start seeing all of these little details, all of this sculpt, all of this Filmation and vintage inspired blend to make what is ultimately just an amazing, amazing playset. And then of course you've got your spire up top, which, well, we'll have to get up there to see. So this is the other side of it. So we've got our spire here with the wolf gates, and this is another piece that you do have to assemble, which I talked about in that other video. So it's got like it's not a metal door, but it looks metal in terms of appearance. There is kind of a rustic nature to it, so it's got a bunch of oranges and browns kind of brushed into this metal looking plastic with the wolf on the top. You do have to put the whole thing on, so the spire actually goes on, and then you have to put the snake head over here. This guy is pretty interesting because it's not as detailed as I thought it was going to be. Something about it, I feel like some of the features do get lost in some respects here, especially the teeth. They have a different shade of green, as do the eyes. They have a different shade of green than the rest of the snake. but they really don't pop because they're almost like just one shade lighter. So they're a little off color from the rest to kind of pop, but at the same time they kind of don't also, if that makes any sense. I do think it looks really good though as far as sculpt goes. There is a ton of detail crammed in there, and it's covered in a wash with the black that runs through all those nooks and crannies just to bring out the sculpt and make it look a little more imposing. And of course it blends in with the snake that wraps around the rest of the playset. So this thing is very much another vintage inspired thing with a little Filmation nod, I think, when it comes to how the snake is wrapped around. But it's obviously also another focal point because the fact that it's so big, it's so tall. Again, this is a 3+ feet of plastic from top to bottom when you're talking about this side. So another really cool aspect of it when it comes to varying levels of the playset. You've got your smaller side with the face and the wolf tower. You've got your bridge with your lava falls, and then you've got the snake aspect with the spire. And you can have Skeletor standing up here menacingly watching over Eternia. Now, what about figure placement? How does this thing actually work in terms of showcasing your figures? Well, at least on the front. There's a lot of space inside that we'll have to talk about separately because I can't show you both sides at the same time. So you've got various sort of play fields here. And I don't know if you can really put as many figures on this thing as, well, maybe you want. I guess it depends on what you want of this thing. For me, it's really going to be a handful of my favorite figures that are likely going to dot this thing. But it does have, I think, a few limitations when it comes to being able to really put figures on it. That said, the vintage playset also had a lot of limitations when it came to putting figures on it. So that's neither here nor there, but it's something to chew on. So you've got places like the field over here. So I've got Faker on this one. I've got Ultimate Faker on this one. You can fit probably 2 figures right here. I've got Triclops here on the gangway to the bridge. It's not something that you can really have a lot of figures kind of dotting the staircase. It's very, very steep. And it may look a little bigger than it actually is, but it's really thin. Like right here, a figure can't fit there. Figure really can't fit here because, I mean, look how steep that is. He's really like falling right over. So you've got to deal with placement pretty specifically when it comes to what you want to do with them. So you can have a couple figures right around here on the bridge area. You've got this field over here. So I've got my man Stinkor down over here. You can fit a couple figures there. I've got God Skeletor up here on the top. You could fit another figure or 2 on top of the head. And then I've got He-Man over here actually in the shackles. So those things are pretty cool on their own just because of the fact that they're real metal chains. The shackles do work, so you can pop them open and you can put a figure, imprison him on there. So that's really cool. They're part of the playset. You don't have to put those together. They come on it out of the box. So there are a number of areas where you can stage your figures. It really just going to come down to what you want to do with them. You've got this spot down here, over here in the corner with the big gaping hole. You can put them there. And then of course, if you've got a big enough spot like I plan to have, you're going to have enough area in front of Snake Mountain so you can put a few figures down at ground level as well. So you're probably looking at a decent number of figures, but you're certainly not going to be throwing the entire Motu Classics figure selection on there. I don't think anybody expects to do that, but I do think there are a handful of really solid spots to place your figures without overcrowding it. And then there are a few areas like the spiral staircase here or the curved staircase that are a little bit haphazard, maybe not the best place to try and put your figures. Now, when it comes to the back side of this thing, it's very, very different because this is very much a vintage looking kind of shell style playset. So you've got a big void over here. You've got a big void here. You've got a big void over here as well. And that's not a negative, not to me anyway. It very much harkens back to this kind of playset. And I do think that there is a lot to talk about here, despite the fact that there are a bunch of big empty spaces. Those, of course, lead to spots where you can put a bunch of figures if you're going to populate the backside of this thing. So we're going to start over here, and we'll talk about what's going on. So we've got to start with, we've got the wolf spire. So, of course, kind of the microphone aspect of it. And this thing just pegs in right here, and it sits up top. Actually, let me talk about this now. This piece is removable, this gray piece. It's actually a platform that just sits into a couple of teeth that sort of hold it in place. So don't pick it up by this. It's not meant to be load bearing. So don't pick it up by this. If you're going to start moving it around, it will, or it might potentially swing out. So word to the wise. Well, we've got the wolf spire, and it's just gray with a little bit of patina to it, really. But there is a play feature here, because you can actually use this to store accessories. You can't put everything in here, like Skeletor's Havoc Staff can't really fit in there because of these bars that are in the top of it and the bottom, but you can fit swords and guns and a bunch of other weaponry that you otherwise maybe don't want floating around in the playset. So I do like that. That's pretty cool. The design on it's pretty nice as well. I do like the very spiky base, and the wolf head, of course. You just pop this on and it will, there you go, like so. It'll sit there. You've got your control panel, and this was what, the battery cover for Snake Mountain. So you've got a fully sculpted and painted piece here. I believe I put this on upside down in the unboxing video. I was just that excited. But you've got, you know, kind of like a map readout. You've got a bunch of techno doodads, and then a very like Alcala looking style Skeletor skull, which I do really like that little detail. We do have what seems to be like, I don't know if this is a little Easter egg or not, but kind of like the Gray Skull Great sticker on the inside of there, which I thought was pretty funny. That's kind of cool. And of course you can see the lava falls from the backside, which of course show you that this is kind of translucent, because it's a little bit more orange on the backside, so you can kind of shine a light through that if you so choose, just to do something like that. I'll probably do something so you can kind of hit it with your phone or something, or just for playing around, and you can see it kind of shines and lights up really well. So if you want to put some lights back there, I think you've got a pretty cool display piece. We do have an area down here for just, you know, a play field. There are a few accessories that we can talk about that might go there. We've got a ladder, which I think goes specifically right here. So it's really meant to kind of go between your floor area and the second level. You could use it on the front, obviously. You can put it over here, but I figure it's going to go here. I was thinking that this was the Grayskull, the Castle Grayskull ladder, because they are damn near the exact same thing, but they do seem to be a little different in some ways. This has a little spike on the top that this one doesn't, but these are eerily similar ladders. The only thing that's really different, other than that little spike that I can tell, is another little notch on this side, and maybe they just cut them off or something, so it's not immediately noticeable, but the paint is different. This is like a more brown, this is kind of a more decaying kind of wood look. So you've got that, so you do have a ladder, because you need a ladder in a playset. And then we've got another door down here. So this leads to what is kind of like a jail area, but it's kind of weird, because this doesn't really hold much. You can put a figure right here, and he's like pressed up against the wall. So as a result, bigger figures can't go in there. Figures like Man-at-Arms or Stratos, you know, stuff like that, they can't really fit in there. And another thing is that this is also a play feature area. It's a breakaway wall from the outside. So you pop it in, and then this piece pops out, and there's a big hole, so you can have someone come save whoever's in there. But when they do that, they're going to kick them into the front of the gate. So I don't know, they're going to hurt whoever they're saving at the same time. I like the idea of just being able to store a figure here and, you know, put him in jail, but it does kind of complicate the play factor. Granted, I don't know exactly how much I'm going to be playing with it, but it's you know, it's worth mentioning that it's kind of cool, but at the same time its functionality does seem to be a little bit on the limited side. So you got that as well. And then we've got this bigger area over here, which is mostly reserved for, well, at least one of the coolest aspects for me is the little, you know, acid pool demons here, which this thing, I don't know, it could have been its own thing sold separately. This is awesome. The tentacles look fantastic. They are big enough and sturdy enough that they can hold a figure up. You got the two demons coming out, and this was just a sticker in the vintage playset. So they went all out by making this. I mean, it's humongous. It's a massive piece. It's super detailed. It's definitely one of the more loved aspects of this playset, I think. Whoever was in charge of making this kind of went to town on it. Paint is top-notch. The sculpt is tremendous. I really just love everything about this. Some of the larger accessories that this thing comes with are honestly, in many ways, worth the price of admission. This thing's really cool, and it really only goes right here, truly, which makes sense as far as the placement of that sticker in the vintage playset. It really doesn't go anywhere else. You've got this big kind of dais almost, so you've got a big skull throne area here. That's where that hole on the front leads to, so there's some steps and they come down. Tons of detail in there, spikes, all of the kind of evil faces, skulls that are in there. And then we've got what was really just a void otherwise. You've got the inside of the shell here, and they decided to kind of populate it a little bit with some of these evil faces. So you've got, this one that's kind of like I don't know, he looks like the Fluke from X-Files to me. We've got this kind of oozing skull. You've got a couple monster faces over here, and these just peg in. Without making too crazy of a sound there. They just peg in there. And then there's this weird little slide ooze area up top. I think it's part of the inner sculpt, and they kind of put this on there to hide it. So there's like this sort of slime that's almost coming down purple with a bunch of black accents. So I really like the fact that they decided to just flesh this out. If it had been some sort of just void, I wouldn't have been all that happy about it. But the fact that there is a bunch of stuff here, despite the fact that it's just a bunch of heads and faces, it very much flows with all of the evil heads and faces that are all over the outside. So these are cool little accents on the inner portion of Snake Mountain, just to flesh it out a bit and make it a little bit more full, because this thing is really, really massive. There is a lot of empty space, but this does, help kind of bring it out a bit. And then we've got the top of the spire here, and this is mostly just the door and this sort of other play field that we've got. So another area to pose and use one of the play features. So as far as the door goes, it's just a door. It goes in, and it really only goes in just enough to get your figures in. It's kind of an odd hinge, so it only goes back this far. It does not go forward all the way. It's really just a door that opens one way. But you've got a play field here for your figures. You've also got the net here. It's just a mesh net. But this is, of course, the thing that people were really worried wasn't going to be included in the box. But it is here, it is present, and it is functional because there is a trap door here. So you pop your He-Man on, and there's a little latch underneath, and you can do this, and then he falls right in. So you've got that there. I am not sure exactly how much use this thing is going to get out of me, but I love it, and I can tell you that my daughter loves it, just as far as the looks of it goes, the very vintage aspect of having a net, having a trapdoor. It's very quintessential evil lair playset kind of thing. So throw him in there, let him take a he-nap or whatever he's about to do in there, but it does look cool, and it's a really nice little bonus thing, a little bit of a surprise almost to be able to do that on something that is definitely geared more towards, well, quote-unquote adults. Now there are a couple of other accessories that ultimately will either go back here or they will go outside of the playset, depending on what you want to do with it. The first of which is the Bone Throne. This thing is arguably one of the coolest pieces that comes in this set. It is very Filmation inspired. Obviously this is exactly what Skeletor sits in the cartoon. So you've got this really, really massive throne that you can put your figures in. I will say that not every figure is going to sit in this. Even the Motu Classic Skeletor has issues sitting in this just because their hips were really not the greatest for sitting. The Filmation Club Grayskull Skeletor will fit in this a little bit better by comparison though, but you can get your figures in there. If you work at it enough and you want it enough, you'll get them in there. But the sculpt on this thing is just tremendous. I can't tell you how long I've wanted something like this, whether it came in this set or not. This is something I've really wanted. Sculpt is tremendous. The paintwork on it is fantastic. So it's white with like this blue frosting over it to give it a nice shaded effect, and it just looks great. I mean, the sculpt on this is tremendous. It's definitely one of those things like the little pit monsters back there that someone really took a lot of time and attention to make sure that this accessory was done correctly. So you can fit this thing, up over here is really probably the best place for it. You can set it back here, have Skeletor here with some minions doing whatever he wants him to do, while some other ones are down here on the bottom. And then we've got this big thing. So this, of course, is another Filmation nod. So we've got Skeletor's table, and this is another thing that it's something that I've really wanted. There have been custom pieces like this for years and years, but it's nice to be able to get something that's actually official, a part of the line, and it's tremendous. It's really big, so you can fit 5 or 6 different figures around it, and it's got the big red jewel, kind of like a candy coated center there with all of this kind of like shattered work, the spikes coming out of it, the bones that line it all, and then all these spikes down here at the bottom. It looks fantastic. It's got some good weight to it. It's very heavy. It is also very big. It doesn't really have a home here. This is definitely something that I feel like I'm going to use apart from Snake Mountain. Honestly, I have a feeling this thing's going to be used outside of Snake Mountain as well. I'll put another Skeletor sitting on it on the shelf because I don't want it to be hidden all the time. I don't want either of these things to be hidden. So this is something that really doesn't have too much of a home. If you put it down here, it doesn't really work. If you put it here, it doesn't really work, and it can't fit over here either. There's really no place for it. It's honestly not something that I think is meant to exist specifically inside of Snake Mountain. It definitely is something that belongs with it, but I don't know if it's something that everybody's going to want to put inside the playset, which I think is fine. This is an extra thing that goes along with the idea of Snake Mountain, and it works really well. I mean, both of these things are tremendous accessories, something that you would expect to pay, you know, 50, 60 bucks at least on their own outside of the playset. So that's a nice little bonus, and a couple of very Skeletor-centric pieces of furniture, really, that kind of bring everything up a notch here. So that's the details, that's all the stuff that it comes with. What about the functionality of it? This thing is, of course, modular. It is very much two halves. We've got our snake half, and we've got our face half. And they are very much separate pieces when it comes to the construction. There is a hinge down the middle that I talked about, and the front has the bridge that basically holds it together when it's stretched outward. So this sort of, again, locks it in place so that you can't, start collapsing it in on itself by mistake. But what do you do when you want to fold it up, assuming you're ever going to want to do that? I'm not sure how many people are going to, but let's talk about it. So it does hinge, and it just folds over like this, but it's not quite that simple. So you really can't have everything together like this. So we've got, of course, the face half here, and you've got the wolf's head spire. This thing kind of gets in the way. It's not exactly meant to be this way. So as you can see, it's not shutting. So what you have to do is you actually have to take this guy out. And from that point on, you actually still aren't done, because you have to take at least this head off, the one that's second from the end on this side. This has to come off, and then it will shut, and you've got your seam. This is not, however, like Grayskull, where you've got latches or anything like that. There are no clips here to hold it together, so it's just gonna sit there. I'm not entirely sure that that's really a problem. I don't see it spontaneously opening, but it's something to take note of. There are no clasps, so if you're gonna move it and you've closed it like this, just be mindful of that, I suppose. And then, of course, there's the display aspect of it as I pop the trapdoor down. So this side, I'm not so sure is the side you would want to display if you're going to keep it closed, because of the fact that you've got all of the inner workings on this side still exposed. It's not quite as aesthetically pleasing. So, for my money, if you're going to display only one side while it is closed, you're going to display the snake side. So you're going to display this side with the spire, and you'll have that there, and then you'll have a full, complete set, or side rather, without having a bunch of extra stuff shining through from the back side of the other piece. So it is collapsible. It is very easy, but at the same time, you do have to remove some parts. You've got to remove these. I don't really know where you're going to put these, because they don't really fit inside all that well. You certainly can't have the bone throne. You can't have the table in there either. So it's not something where you can throw everything in and seal it up. But at the same time, if you need to do this, it is very simple, all things considered. There is one other thing I want to talk about, though, when it comes to Snake Mountain. How big is it compared to Castle Grayskull? Because Castle Grayskull was always a big thing. It's certainly one of the biggest things that I have in my toy collection. It's certainly a modern toy. But Snake Mountain is again, something else. So, here it is in front of Snake Mountain. And you can see that, going up to the spire, the very tip, we're already mostly out of frame when it comes to Grayskull. It's an incredibly different type of playset, from height to width, depth, the whole thing. It's just a much, much different aspect when it comes to size, when it comes to just how big this thing is going to be in your home. So Grayskull was big, and I always thought it was pretty much the biggest thing we were going to get in this line, but Snake Mountain is something else. I really hope you've got room for this thing. So yeah, that about covers it, I think. This thing is impressive. There is no other way to describe it. It is an incredibly impressive piece. It is certainly going to be a focal point for any collection, Motu or otherwise. I mean, this thing is going to draw the attention of anybody that comes near it, and rightly so. It is humongous. It is, again, a massive purple mountain, so it's kind of an eye grabber on its own, but it does have a tremendous number of selling points here. Size, the overall presence, just the attention to detail when it comes to things like all of the different colors on the front, the vines, the face, the moving mouth over here that you can't see at the moment, the shackles, things like that. There's a lot of really cool vintage callbacks, even for someone who didn't have a Snake Mountain as a kid. There's still a lot of stuff that I am familiar with from the playset and like to see. I love the blood falls. I love the way the snake wraps around the spire. And I do like all of the stuff that we get with this thing. The table, the bone throne, I really can't get enough saying that. The pit monsters, all of it. There's all kinds of little aspects to it that are their own little things. Because again, those could have been sold individually and I would have bought them right up just to have something like that, Snake Mountain notwithstanding. I think that they assembled a pretty solid package here. Granted, we did have to wait a very long time. I don't really mind at this point. At this point, it's irrelevant how long we really had to wait because it's here. It's the end of an era. It's a great finale to Motu Classics. It is a very expensive piece, and it's hard to say whether or not I really think it's worth it because it's a lot of money that was spent, for some folks over time, for some folks all at once. It is something that I've wanted for a very, very long time. It's something that I'm really happy to have in my home. It's something that I'm happy to play with my daughter. She's having a great time with it. We're having a lot of fun with it. So the cost aspect of it is still a big thing, but at the same time, I do think I'm getting my money's worth when it comes to how it's going to display in the room and how much fun we're having with it, because at this point, we really can't keep our hands off of it. It is just a lot of fun. It's a really cool piece, and it's something that you are definitely going to have to see to believe, because Super7 and the Horsemen did a really good job on this, and I'm very, very happy to finally have it here. So that's it, guys. That's going to do it for the finale, the end of Motu Classics, Snake Mountain. I'll catch you next time.